So the other night I was at a meetup and I did a demo of basically automated testing with React, Jest, and CircleCI for continuous integration. And it turns out that's actually a really cool stack for continuous integration. And so today I'm going to basically rehash that whole demo for the people that were not at the meetup. So yeah, let's get started basically. So first of all, what is a unit test essentially? So a unit test you could think of as like a blueprint for your application. So let's say I'm building this dope cabin. Okay, so we got the steps that go up to the cabin. We have this like door on the roof. We have this triangle shape here, and we have like a certain number of like logs here. So looks like there's like 8 logs here. So I could basically put on a blueprint, if I'm building these log cabins for people, I could say like, once we build these, I want you to inspect each, log cabin and, make sure there's 8 logs on each side. I'm not like the best at building log cabins, obviously. So, if there's some hipster out there, then feel free to correct me. But, I could say like, this roof should be a certain height, should be like 12 feet tall or whatever. And then this like door right here should be like 8 feet tall. And then there needs to be like, at least 10 steps here. And if any one of those specs are not right, then there's obviously a problem and we shouldn't actually be allowed to sell this log cabin until that's fixed, right? So it's a little bit like that in, unit tests and continuous integration. So I probably don't want a junior developer to change, some piece of the code and having that being merged in. Essentially, that would be pretty bad if, that code shipped out and people started using it and something broke. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about in this demo. So let's take a look at our app currently. So this is just a Create React app. I'm using CRA, and it's pretty out of the box, but I did add like one component, which is like a search component, and I'll show you that here in a second. So this is CircleCI dashboard, by the way. I recently started using CircleCI. I think it's pretty awesome. Like, it has some really cool features, and it's just a really cool application. So highly recommend CircleCI. But we'll get to that in a second. But let's take a look at what our React app looks like so far. So this is pretty much, the default Create React app out of the box. Got that little React logo spinning. And I actually added this search component. So what does the search component do? Essentially, it's just like a list of programming languages that you can search. So if I wanted to find Swift, I could type S, and you can see that it kind of auto-completed with some of the languages. W, I, F, you get the idea. So I type Java, gives me Java and JavaScript. So it's a pretty simple search. Now, the way that search works is there's like a utils search function. So the search function takes in a search array, and you see I basically have separated this search logic into a different JavaScript file so that it's easily maintainable. So I have this search function, and it just filters through the search array, and based on the query, it will, return a new, search array if the item contains the query. So if it contains like SW, it would return Swift. So yeah, this whole thing is separate from the rest of my application. So let's take a look at just kind of the application itself so you get an idea here. So this is just my regular, create React app.js file. So you can see, you just have the app. Now I changed this to use the functional component hooks style. So if you're interested in that, you can go back and watch the last demo I did on hooks. Pretty dope. Now, the only thing really that I changed here is this search component. So what is this search component? Well, search is essentially, again, we're using hooks, the use state. So we just have results, set results, and it uses initially the value of this languages array. So languages is just the file where I have hard-coded all of the programming languages. And so it just kind of sets the results of that initially. So then I have this update search, which happens every time the input is changed. So every time we type in this box, this update search function happens. And so that basically says, set the results of, this list of programming languages to essentially the value returned by this search function, passing in the languages array as well as the text that we search for. So essentially whatever's in this box just gets passed to this search function. And this search function is what I just showed. This is just like the filter function of the, all the search items. Okay, now let's say somebody came along and, basically made a change. So they delete this .to lowercase. Now, if you've ever written like something similar before, you kind of know that in order to, have this search working, and if I said SW with a lowercase s, it will actually still bring up Swift because it converts the query and the search array items to lowercase. So like if we didn't have the two lowercase, I type in Swift, or actually if I didn't have either one of the lower cases and I type Swift, it actually doesn't return the language because the, two lowercase is not implemented to basically convert both values to lowercase. So it's not going to find it unless it's a capital S. So that's definitely not a good thing to have happen in our application. So what we want to do is we want to run our application through a series of tests. So to write a test, all I have to do is create a new file called search.test.js. Now this test file is essentially going to run through a bunch of potential possibilities that may cause our application to break, essentially. So inside the test, we're going to import the search function so that we can test it. Pretty straightforward. And then we're also going to import the languages that we have hard-coded. This is actually in the root path, I believe. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is describe this group of tests. So what exactly is this testing? Well, it's testing the search. So in Jest, you can use this describe function, and we'll just call it search. And then the second parameter is just a function for all the tests to run. Now there's a couple keywords that you can use to actually run the tests, or to basically create new tests. but I like to use this IT keyword or it keyword. So essentially what I can do is say like let's see, for the first test, I think we need to do like check if the item exists in search. So what we could do is say should contain item if it exists. And then we also pass in a function for this test. So the way that we determine if this test passes is by using expect. Don't know why VS Code is doing that, but we can say expect when we call this search function with languages and the string value of Swift with a capital S dot to contain, which basically means that whatever array is returned by this search, since we passed in the hard-coded languages and we passed in a value that we know is in the languages, it should definitely at least return us an array with that value somewhere in it, right? So if it doesn't really contain that value, then we know that the search is just like totally not working at all. So that's obviously the first thing that we want to test for. So we can expect this search function to contain the value of Swift. So the exact value that we passed into the search function. Okay, so that's a pretty straightforward test. The second test I'm going to write is like maybe the search. Well, if you don't search anything in the search, it should definitely just return all the items that are in the list. So I'll do that now. So should return all items if there is no search or query. And then from there, I can just expect the search function of languages with an empty value, so just an empty string value. And expect the length of this search array result to be, there's another Jest function called toBe, and then just say languages.length. So we want the value that's returned from the search, the length of that array should actually be equal to the original hard-coded languages array's length. And okay, so the third test I'm going to write is going to be for the caps lock. So when we saw earlier, when we made that change to the search.js, we would actually have broken it if the .to lowercase wasn't implemented. So maybe somebody at a future point in time will, change that, and it's really important that it doesn't change the behavior of the application. So how can I write this in a test? Well, I could say should not care about caps lock and then we will expect the search function of languages, and let's pass in like something we know should work, which is like maybe Swift all capitals, and then to contain the original Swift value that we know is in the array. So if we search it all capitals or all lowercase, we would expect that the search would just not care and return, the array that contains this Swift value. Okay, so that looks good for our search test. So in order to essentially run this test and see how it works, we can say npm test. Now, if you're using anything other than create React app, I don't know how it sets up the test command, but essentially you just have to figure it out for your own, build system. But in create React app, it's just npm test. So it's running our search test and boom. So it says test suites 1 pass 1 total, tests 3 pass 3 total. So that's, this whole search test is our test suite, and all these, 3 tests that we wrote are our actual tests. So you can see that our search function is working properly now. So it says, it basically has this check mark next to each of the, items that, succeeded. So should contain item if it exists, should return all items if no query, should not care about caps lock. So all these tests succeeded. Now let's say that, some junior developer's first day at work and he comes in and says, search, I don't know what that 2 lowercase is. I'm just going to delete that. Yeah, this is just too complex for me, yo. And so anyway, essentially our search function has now changed. And if we test this again, you'll see that, our 2 tests here passed, but that 3rd test that says should not care about caps lock failed. So now we have a test that will run to essentially check if this language's search function is working properly with items that have not been converted to, the proper case. And in this case, since I took out that 2 lowercase, it actually failed. So this is really good in terms of, every time a git commit is done, we should ideally run these tests and make sure that each test passes. And I'll show you how to do that in part 2, which is going to be actually setting up CircleCI and integrating it with your Git repo to actually run these every time that you make a new, commit.